Hello, fourth graders from Hingham. My name is Janice McPhillips and I work at Holly Hill Farm, which is located in Cohasset, not too far from Hingham. So if you haven't already been on a field trip or for summer camp, please come and visit. We are an organic vegetable, flower, and herb farm, not too far away. Today I'm here all by myself, which is why I don't have my mask on. It's just me and my tripod holding my camera. And I'm here on the Plymouth River School property, right next to the school's garden. Now all 4 schools in Hingham have a garden. They all look a little different, but they have something very important in common, which is they all have soil, and that's what we're here to learn about today. A little bit about soil, which is important to you guys as 4th graders, because I know you're studying soil in your classroom. It's important to us as farmers and gardeners, because most of the food that we eat comes from soil. So soil is very different from dirt. Dirt is what you get on your hands, what you might have on your shoes, and someone might say, don't track dirt into the house or wipe the dirt off your pants before you come inside. Soil is a very complex, fabulously interesting combination of different things. And we're going to learn a little bit by looking around here on the school's property and see what we can find. Okay, so let's take a quick look around and see what's here. This is the garden at Plymouth River School. There's some raised beds that are made out of wood that are inside of a fenced-in area. There's the compost bins. Talk a little bit about that. There's a beautiful wooded area right next to the school. You can see some beautiful pine trees or evergreen trees, a couple of deciduous trees. Hopefully you know what that word means. It means they're trees that every year in the spring they make leaves, and then in the fall the trees fall down onto the ground. And there's some grass. Grass looks like it's in a little bit of tough shape. We had a very dry summer this summer, so it didn't get much rain to make the grass healthy. But there is grass here in this area. This isn't the playground, but the playground's up at the top of that hill. But we have a lot of soil underneath of all those different areas, and we're going to take a look at the different kinds of soil under each area. Okay, the first soil sample we're going to take is from underneath of the grass here. So I'm going to get out my shovel, dig a little bit. Voila! Here's our first sample of soil. You can see some of the grass. Oh, here's a that's a grub. I think that's a Japanese beetle grub. That's neat. Sometimes when I look through soil, I see some worms. I don't see too many worms here, but I do see some roots. Oh, there's a worm. Awesome. Little worms. Great, so that's our first sample. Now I'm in a wooded area next to the school, and as you can see, there are some very tall pine trees, also known as evergreen trees. There's a beautiful red tree that I think is a maple tree. That's a deciduous tree. It's the kind of tree that loses its leaves every year this time, and they fall on the ground. I'm going to take a little soil sample from around the base of these trees. Okay, let's see what we found. Well, as you might expect, we found some leaves. A little piece of an oak leaf and a lot of pine needles. More pine needles. There's the soil that was underneath of the trees. We'll add that to our collection. So here we are in the garden, and as you can see, the raised bed is made out of wood, and there's a couple weeds here left over from things that grew over the summer, so we're going to take the weeds out, and we're going to take a soil sample from this garden area. I'm going to add it to our collection. Okay, let's get some compost from this bin. Nice. Okay, there is some finished compost from the compost bin. You can sort of see there's some leaves. Looks like they're not fully decomposed. Sometimes I find pieces of avocado pits or things like that, but this looks like it's all pretty well decomposed. Let's add this to our collection. Okay, let's take a closer look at these 4 samples. So this is the sample that came from underneath of the grass. You can see the grass and the soil that was underneath of it. Now, I know you're doing some experiments in your classroom where you're putting samples in a jar with some water and shaking it up. And if you did that to these samples, you would see that there are definitely different things in each of these samples. This one is made up of a mixture of sand and silt and clay and some humus. And the humus is the decomposed dead bits of grass and roots and other things. So that's what's in this soil sample. This is the sample from the garden. And you can see, oh, there's some rocks. Nice. Some dead bits of plants. That looks like a root. That might be a seed left over from something that was growing. You think there's sand and silt and clay in this sample? Well, you could tell if you did a test where you put a sample into some water and shook it up, but my guess is that the answer is yes, that there is a mix of sand and silt and clay in here, because this soil was brought here from a garden center many years ago. We brought in some good quality garden soil, which is a mix of sand and silt and clay and humus. The plants that are going to grow in the garden need a lot of humus. It helps feed the plants that are growing in a garden. And this is the sample from underneath of the trees. You can see little bits of leaves and the pine needles. Now what about this? Is there any sand and silt and clay in this sample? Well, I think the answer is no, because this is mostly, we didn't dig down very deep. We just took maybe an inch or so off the top. So what this is mostly decomposed leaf litter, pine needles, pine cones, things like that, decompose in the soil. And the nutrients from this sample help feed the trees year after year. So this is mostly humus. Living things, after they are done living, they decompose and turn into humus. So this is a sample of humus from the woods, from a wooded area. Pretty much any wooded area, if you were to go in and dig up this, it would look like something like this, and it smells really good. I hope you have a chance to do that sometime. And this last sample, this is the compost from the compost bin. There's that piece of plastic that I wasn't so happy about. But you can also see some decomposing leaves. Sometimes I find things like the seed from a peach pit or something like that. Sometimes I find worms. I don't see any here, but I do see a lot of rich, brown, decomposed organic matter, also known as humus. Now, do you think there is sand and silt and clay in this sample? Well, I think the answer to that, again, just like with the sample from underneath the trees, I think the answer to this is no, because this is all organic matter, all living things like apple cores and banana peels and orange rinds, plus leaves and straw that were put into the compost bin and mixed around, and slowly over time the decomposers that live in the compost bin did their work and turned all that living material into humus. So this is pretty much 100% humus. No sand, no silt, no clay. Now that you know about garden soil and what makes garden soil a great place for growing plants, let's go visit the garden and put some plants into one of the raised beds there. Okay, here I am back at the Plymouth River School garden, and as you can see, I've cleared out the weeds from this bed. It used to look like that. Looks a lot better. I've cleared out the weeds, and I added some compost to enrich the soil to make this garden be ready for planting. So now, look what I brought. I brought a tray of kale from the farm. This is a beautiful kind of kale called Siberian kale. It's been growing since about the end of August. And it is time to put these kale plants in a bigger place. So let's look at what we see at the parts of this plant. This right here is the leaf of the plant. This down here is the stem. And down here is a very tangled web of roots. This is a plant that really needs to be in a bigger space. The roots are all tangled there at the bottom, and they need to grow in a bigger space like this garden. See the little tiny space that kale plant was growing relative to my finger? That's about an inch, a little over an inch square. And as you can see, that kale plant that came out of there is pretty squished. It really, really needed to have a bigger home. Okay. I also want to show you these kale seed pods. So those kale plants that were growing here in the garden last spring made some flowers, and after some bees came and visited the flowers, the flowers turned into seed pods. And here, inside the seed pod, are a lot of little tiny kale seeds. These kale seeds can grow into kale plants and make fabulous kale for us to eat. So grow well, little kale plant. Make some food for us.